Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Lost Codex Legends. My name is Jesse, and today we're talking about yet another rogue character. No, I'm kidding. No more rogue characters, not until next week. Today we're actually going to talk about a character who has been quite active in Classic WoW, actually quite active in all of WoW. In almost every expansion has had a very minor role, but been there in some way. And that person is, of course, Miss Sally Whitemane. Sally Whitemane has a pretty interesting story all the way from before World of Warcraft. We see a little bit of her childhood to recent events in Legion. So let's get started. Let's talk about Sally. Now, we do get an early glimpse of Sally Whitemane's childhood during the old Hillsbrad Foothills instance. When we go to South Shore, we can actually find her running around South Shore playing some games, slaying some imaginary enemies, and purifying monsters with Renault Maugraine and Little Jimmy. We know both of these children will play a role in her adulthood and the choices she makes later on. We'll come back to that later. But let's make an assumption here, because we don't know exactly what her young upbringing was about, but we could probably assume that it had something to do with the Holy Light. There was some sort of religious upbringing in some way. She trained as a priestess, or became insanely powerful very quickly. We know that the events of Old South Shore were during when Thrall escaped from Durnhold, and considering she's a threat in modern day WoW, she's actually quite young when she's an adult, and insanely powerful. So let's assume, I think it's safe to say we can assume she had some sort of upbringing, whether it was in the Church of the Holy Light, or probably not as a paladin, but definitely within the Church of the Holy Light with some sort of interference from the priests there, because later on, at a fairly young age, her innocence would be completely shattered as she witnessed her family succumb to the horrific plague of undeath when they were traveling through northern Lordaeron. Not only did she witness her parents and her siblings die a horrible, gruesome death from the plague, but she also witnessed their reanimation and had to fully destroy their bodies, which just left her broken by guilt and rage. The only thing that would bring her happiness after this was cleansing and destroying the undead, something that she found great joy and great satisfaction in. And considering she uses the Holy Light later on in her as she ascends through her adulthood, again, it was safe to say that she probably had some sort of religious upbringing, or perhaps this impactful death that she was forced to face, maybe that sort of elevated her powers, or she found power behind her rage and her grief. And we know that the light does answer the call of the Scarlet Crusade, so maybe in some way Sally Whitemane's tragic witnessing of her family's horrible death almost amplified her power based on her rage. We don't really know. What we do know is that she pursues her career as a priestess and eventually joins up with Renault Maugraine and Jimmy again to join the fanatics of the Scarlet Crusade. Now, we know that in the early days of the Scarlet Crusade, there was sort of a division amongst its members. Some of them felt that the plague of Lordaeron was the ordeals and the problems of men, and doesn't involve outside races like dwarves and elves and gnomes and things like that. And that's sort of where the racism and the xenophobism comes in for the Scarlet Crusade, while other members of the Paladin orders go off and break off to make the Argent Dawn and from the remnants of the Silver Hand. So we know that there is sort of a division in the early days of the Scarlet Crusade. Now, the majority of Sally Whitemane's story takes place in the Scarlet Monastery, which once stood as a proud bastion for Lordaeron's priesthood, a center for learning and enlightenment. It actually was a place where paladins went to train before the Third War. With the rise of the undead, however, during the Third War, the peaceful monastery was turned into a stronghold for the fanatics of the Crusade. And although she was merely a child when the early initial movements of the Crusade were set in motion, when Alexandros Maugraine purified the Orcish artifact, and all those that you can see during the event in Old Hillsbrad are present, we know that she rises through its ranks pretty quickly once it becomes an established order of human-only paladins during the Scourge War during the Third War. Under the Scarlet leadership, and specifically Whitemane's command, the members of the Scarlet Crusade became even more extreme in their battles against the undead, so much that anyone who wasn't part of the Crusade that were tortured and killed. Their paranoia was unparalleled, and anyone who wasn't them was a problem. Anyone who wasn't them was, at risk of infection or risk of corruption. And the Crusade was extremely, extremely closed off with its members, and Sally Whitemane was amongst those who saw anyone not among their ranks as corrupted and infected, and as someone who needed to be purged, which resulted in a lot of innocent deaths, a lot of innocent bystanders killed in the name of the Scarlet Crusade, which, for the record, not all of its members were A-OK with, and we'll get to that in just a moment. At some point in time, Sally Whitemane was present when Talon Fordring became a member of the Scarlet Crusade after he had renounced the Order of the Silver Hand, Talon being Tyrion's son. As Sally Whitemane rose to the ranks of the Scarlet Crusade, so too did Renault Mograine, who was promoted to Scarlet Commander after betraying his father, with a whole bunch of stuff we'll get into when we cover those characters. And although Sally stood at his side, as we know during the iconic fight when Mograine dies and Sally comes out and resurrects him, he says, at your side, my lady. Although that pairing is kind of an iconic pairing, his canonical death, she wasn't present for. She hears of a impending massive scourge attack happening on Hearthglen, and Renault Mograine commands her to take an army to go help out the Scarlets at Hearthglen. During this time, Darian Mograine returns to the Scarlet Monastery with the corrupted Ashbringer. That whole situation happens, which is why Renault Mograine is not resurrected by Sally, because she was not present. We see during the attack on Hearthglen, Sally Whitemane just kicking ass in the most amazing way possible. Again, part of the reason why I think she had some sort of upbringing is she's stupidly powerful, and she's quite young at this age, so there has to be some sort of training there, or she's just really strongly connected to the light in some way. I don't know. And so the Scourge attack on Hearthglen did not go as planned, and Sally Whitemane saves the day. After Renault is killed, Talon Fordring becomes the High Lord of the Monastery in Tirisfal Glades. Now, the leadership of the Scarlet Monastery in Tirisfal changes quite a bit for all the males involved in the Scarlet Monastery. Sally, however, is consistent as a leader there. Now, given the paranoid, violent, and frightening nature of the Scarlet Crusade, it's no wonder they made tons of enemies. Two of their major enemies during the Classic period were Varamathras on the Horde side, and a man named Relay the Devout, who was actually a former member of the Scarlet Crusade, who witnessed a terrible butchering and slaughtering of innocents, and then he noped the hell out of the Crusade. He sends Alliance adventurers to deal with the leaders of the Scarlet Crusade, while Varamathras sends Horde adventurers in Classic. Now, because the Renault Mograine event is something that the players do not officially canonically carry out, we can assume that whether it was the Alliance or Horde who took out the Scarlet Crusade's leaders, except for Mograine, Sally Whitemane survives. She actually survives these attacks because of her intense connection to the light. It's not really explained, but somehow she evades the Alliance and the Horde in that situation. She also survives the attack on the monastery when Commander Durand is taken out during the Mists of Pandaria revamp. There was a quest in Cataclysm with all the new quests being redone, where Renault is a target of those quests, but it's pretty much considered not canon because Renault should have been long dead, even though Joseph, a Scarlet Renegade, and Dark Ranger Velenara both send players to kill Sally Whitemane and Renault Mograine. That shouldn't have been, because Renault is killed way before Cataclysm and the quests were updated for Cataclysm. It's a really weird situation. We're just going to consider that not canon. Pretend it's part of the RPG part that's not canon. But Mists of Pandaria, the lore was changed. Commander Durand was brought in, and she survives, even though we kill her in the fight. She survives that encounter, and in her dying breath, she actually says Renault's name. But she survives that too. It seems that she's able to survive or return to life or somehow crawl away after we leave because of her intense connection to the light, who Lilian Voss actually explains during her quest for 2 specific rune blades in the Scarlet Monastery quests. Now, the reason she's still alive, as I just said, is because of her immense connection to the light and her immense capabilities of resurrection. It's apparently canon that she is able to resurrect people, specifically Scarlet Crusaders, from the death. She's extremely connected to the light, extremely powerful in her resurrection. So the whole Durand coming back during the fight and Renault coming back during the original fight, that's all part of her lore, that's all part of her connection, as Lilian Voss specifically mentions that. During the Mists of Pandaria portion of the Scarlet Crusade, it's implied that she's in charge of the crusade, as everyone else is pretty much dead, and as soon as she's taken out, the rest of the Scarlet will fall. Because of these immense weird powers to the light, which we don't really understand, Lilian Voss gets us, the players, to impale her dead corpse with the Blades of the Anointed. These are meant to keep her dead and keep her forever dead. Not much is known about these swords, aside from the fact that they were kept within Scarlet Monastery. Seems kind of counterproductive to keep the weapons that would prevent you from ever coming back right under your own nose, or at least make that public knowledge. That wasn't the smartest move on Sally Whitemane's part. But we help Lilian Voss. We stab the body. She claims them, and she runs off to go kill Scourge, and Sally Whitemane is left forever dead. Oh, hang on. No, she's not. In Legion, the Death Knight player, alongside Thessarian, enter the Scarlet Crusade, where Commander Michael Goodchild... What a name. High Commander Michael Goodchild. That's a really solid name. Doesn't matter. He's killed during this questline, and it is here that Sally Whitemane is raised into undeath. The quest text for her resurrection says this: "Sometimes the line between hero and villain is nothing more than perception. As High Inquisitor, Sally Whitemane saw herself as a champion of humanity in the war against the Scourge. Yet under her leadership, the Scarlet Crusade slew the living along with the undead. Death can bring a silent peace to the soul, but not for Sally Whitemane. Her death is one of regret and unrest. We will offer her the chance to atone for her crimes. The price will be high, but I have little doubt she will pay it." When she's resurrected, Thessarian offers her an opportunity to atone for her crimes, says, "The day of reckoning is at hand, and the Burning Legion has come to destroy our world." And they say, "Here's your chance at atonement," to which he says, "I doubt such a thing exists for me." And although death has rid her mind of complete madness, her strong connection to the light, everything that made her spirit strong, has remained. And here she becomes the third member of the Four Horsemen, a sort of ironic and fitting character. I don't want to say end, because her story's still going, but a fitting turn to her entire story arc. Sally is actually present during the attack on Lightshope Chapel when the Death Knights and the Ebon Blade try to recover the body of High Lord Tyrion Fordring. And during this whole fiasco, Darian Mograine sacrifices himself, to which she comments that the light has ravaged his body and there's nothing that they could do to save Mograine. As we know, the story continues with that. We won't cover that here. Sally is also present with the other members of the Four Horsemen, along with the Death Lord and Minerva Ravensorrow during the second attack on the Broken Shore. And that's sort of it for her story arc as a Death Knight. I imagine with Shadowlands, we are going to see more of the Four Horsemen. I really hope so. I really hope to see what all four of the Horsemen, Darian, Mograine, Nazgrim, Trollbane, and Whitemane can do. Definitely, I'm sure anyone who played a Death Knight in Legion will agree with me here. You didn't feel like you were playing a member of the Alliance or Horde. When you played a mage or a druid, you were supposed to be a member of your class hall, but ultimately you still identified with your faction, right? I feel that Death Knights, their campaign was the most interesting in that you were not Alliance, you were not Horde, you were a Death Knight, and that is it. And I really hope that we see, whether through Death Knight only quests or generic quests in general involving the Ebon Blade, more of the Four Horsemen, specifically Sally Whitemane, because she didn't get much of a role after. She became one of the Four Horsemen, and that's amazing, that's really cool. But what else is there for her? What's going to happen next? And with Bolvar Fordragon bringing that pre-event, I definitely hope, at the very least, we see her sooner than later, definitely before Shadowlands. It'd be interesting to see the Four Horsemen interact with members beyond the Ebon Blade. How would Nazgrim react to the Horde? How would Sally Whitemane or Trollbane react to the Alliance. I would love to see that in some way. And the fact that Darien is the fourth Horseman and she's the third Horseman, and there was always that implied connection, especially since her final words when she dies in Mists of Pandaria were of Renault, Darien's brother. Like, there's so much connections there. I'm not saying that there will be a Darien Sally Whitemane undead Death Knight love story. That's kind of bizarre, but maybe it's a thing. The undead deserve love too. Do they? I think so. That's fair. The four Horsemen, they deserve some sort of comfort. They won't have any comfort. They're Death Knights, of course not. But I am excited for Sally Whitemane's future to see what happens, whether it's a major storyline, minor storyline. I'm not too sure, but we will find out definitely more in Shadowlands, if not before Shadowlands. And with that, guys, we are finished with Lost Codex Legends Sally Whitemane. From High Inquisitor of the Scarlet Crusade to the third Horseman of the four Horsemen of the Ebon Blade. What a storyline, what a story arc. I definitely did not see that coming in Legion, and her future, especially what's coming next, is even more exciting. So maybe we'll see more. Fingers crossed. Thank you guys for joining me on this episode of Lost Codex Legends. We'll see you next time. Until then.